Today we are commemorating the martyrdom anniversary of Imam Jafar and Sadiq alayhi salam. It is tomorrow, so during the night of Shahada. Brother Sadiq helping us, and the lecture is pretty much connected to the occasion. And it is on well learning has a soul, which I think is trying to connect the learning in that time and then what we have today. I think will be a nice and interesting time. So Brother Sadiq, please. There is no need to introduce Brother Sadiq. I think most of us.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. لقد جاءت رسل ربنا بالحق ونودوا أن تلكم الجنة ورثتموها بما كنتم تعملون. والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا وحبيب قلوبنا السراج المنير المصطفى الأمجد أبا القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وعلى أصحابه الغر الميامين. أما بعد، يقول الله في المحكم بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وقل ربي زدني علما. صدق الله العلي العظيم. The American University is facing a crisis, and it's a really profound crisis, what some would call an existential crisis. Existential crisis meaning that the very existence of the university is potentially at risk. And there are several reasons for that, both external factors and internal factors. If you look at external factors that threaten the existence of the university, they include political funding disruption. So here in the United States, about $60 billion goes into the American university, supporting federal funding, research. And of that, majority goes to elite universities like Harvard University, MIT, and many of you know about some of the recent political funding situation where the administration is threatening to cut off funding, which is having severe impact on the university systems, including Harvard University. And this graph shows you some of the potential funding threats in the universities and the impact for the universities. Then, in terms of additional external threats, there's also the technology and AI threat. So if you look at how universities have evolved, historically, the university has served a function as a gatekeeper for knowledge, for information. So if you wanted to access specialized information and knowledge, you had to go to an institution with four walls, an institution with a campus. But now, through digitization, now through democratization of a lot of this information is broadly available, and it's led to the eventual collapse of many universities. So these are just some of the statistics of the percentage of public and not-for-profit schools that are at risk of going out of business, that are financially on shaky grounds. And it is over 50% of the universities, so 54% either have some risk factor or have serious risk factors. And in fact, the numbers suggest in the United States that about one university a week goes out of business, no longer exists. Either they consolidate or they completely shut down. And it's not surprising because if you look at the opportunities to access education outside of the traditional four walls, there are many opportunities today, including what are called MOOCs. MOOCs are massive online open courses. These are things like Coursera, things like edX, many others, where you can access knowledge from Oxford, MIT, Harvard, many of these leading elite universities. And you can do it using a freemium model, meaning you pay if you access advanced courses, if you take a certification, but if you don't take a certification, you can access the same lectures and information as everyone else. There are over 220 million learners that have enrolled in these MOOCs, which is significantly higher than all of the universities in the United States combined. So again, another factor. And the final external factor that I want to highlight is the value of artificial intelligence. This is a report from the National Bureau of Economic Research, which is here in Cambridge, where they looked at the potential economic impact of AI. And I think these quotes are pretty dramatic, where the economic value, artificial general intelligence may dramatically reduce demand for higher education as it devalues cognitive skills and undermines the returns to human capital investment. The economic value from the signaling and certification role of higher education will decline. So historically, the value of a degree is that it signals that you know how to attend a university and that you know how to critically think. But as these things now become broadly available, the value of that university, the value of that paper is declining economically. So these are only two of the economic factors that are worth considering in terms of that are the existential threats facing the American university. From an internal perspective, the factors include administrative and bureaucratic bloat. So if you look at how the universities have evolved over the last 40 years or so, we have more, the ratio of administrators to students is significantly higher than the ratio of teachers to students. And this imbalance is causing a perverse incentivization of the things that the university prioritizes. It no longer prioritizes the teacher as the leading figure in the university, but it prioritizes now the administrator, whose primary role is to generate revenue and to increase enrollment. And what this has led between 1980 and 2023, the average price of college tuition fees and room have increased by 150%. So this has led to an internal existential threat of what is the value of the degree if we're simply paying for glorified adult camp, which, it's interesting. I was looking at one of the universities and it was advertising their facilities. And one of the facilities that they were building was this water slide. So come to our university, not because we have the best professor, not because we have the best library, but because we've built a water park for you to enjoy during your off time. And so people now question the value of, well, what am I paying the fees for? And I think this links to the unclear value of the college degree. So if you look at public confidence in the American university, it's declined significantly. From 57% in 2015 to 36% in 2023. And most importantly, and this links to that artificial general intelligence overtaking the signaling value of the degree, most hiring managers in the United States, according to the most recent survey, aren't even looking at the value of the college degree. So they don't even care whether you have a bachelor's degree or not. And you can see the momentum is accelerating in terms of the potential decline and elimination of the American university. And here I have some of the citations if you want to look at this in more detail. So I think given this existential crisis of the American university and the fact that many of us here are affiliated somehow with universities, by virtue of being in Cambridge or Boston, you have some affiliation, whether you're a student, whether you're a faculty member, whether you benefit from the ecosystem as someone who benefits from the research output of the university. This existential crisis has the potential to affect us as well. But I think it's also a great opportunity to reflect on the value of education. The word crisis in Latin comes from the comes from the root word meaning, and I mentioned this during the Eid Khuppah. Crisis comes from this concept of a fork in the road. So it's a turning point, and it's an opportunity to reflect. So when we talk about something being a crisis, it's actually not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing, because it's an opportunity to reflect and to consider what is the output. So why am I discussing this tonight? Because tonight we're commemorating the death of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, who by all accounts is considered the scholar par excellence across many of the Islamic traditions. The Sufis, the Sunnis, the Shi'is all hold Imam Jafar al-Sadiq up high as the scholar par excellence, who represented the epitome or the peak of what ilm represents. So within this context of this existential crisis that we're living, I thought it would be a good opportunity to reflect on the life of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq as an educator, as someone who built an academy, and to see what lessons can we learn from his lifetime that can influence the way that we develop our own pursuit of ilm. What lessons can we learn from the life of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq? So I'm going to divide the discussion into 3 parts. In the first part, very quick chronological overview of the life of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq. So we're not going to go into deep biographical details. If you want a good biography, I can suggest some books afterwards, but tonight isn't a biographical deep dive of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq. I just want to give you a very high level chronological overview of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq and his lifetime. But more importantly, in the first part, I want to talk about the period where Imam Jafar al-Sadiq created his academy and how he pursued, what the objectives of his academy were, and to compare and contrast them with the objectives of the modern university. And I think in that exercise of comparing and contrasting, we can see what values he elevated, what values the modern university elevates, and in that process, get a better understanding of the values that we should elevate on a personal level. In the second part, I want to share some anecdotes from the life of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq that have, personally touched me or influenced me. Because remember, the purpose of these occasions of remembering the martyrdom of the imams and the prophets and what have you is to touch the hearts. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that in the Quran. ذَلِكَ وَمَنْ يُعَظِّمْ شَعَائِرَ اللَّهِ فَإِنَّهَا مِنْ تَقْوَى الْقُلُوبِ. The elevation of the symbols of Allah leads to a increased God consciousness of the hearts. So the purpose of tonight and events like tonight is to remember the life of these individuals in a way that elevates our heart. And so I'm going to share with you some anecdotes that I think are reflective of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq and his lifetime as a scholar, as a student, and as a community leader. And then in the third part of the discussion, I want to answer the question, who are the heirs of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq today? So if the university is not necessarily failing, who can we identify as people that have taken on or carried the legacy of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq today? So that'll be the discussion over the next, how many minutes do we have? 25 minutes until 9 o'clock? 35 minutes? Okay. So yeah, for the next 30 minutes or so, 35 minutes. But please recite aloud salawat before we... So as I said, I'm not going to go over the entire lifetime of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, but what I want to highlight is the important period where he established his academy. So Imam Jafar al-Sadiq was born in the year 83 after Hijrah in Medina to his father, Imam Muhammad al-Baqir. Al-Baqir meaning the one who splits knowledge. So Baqir al-Ulum, the nickname of his father was the one who splits knowledge. So we can derive from that or deduce from that Imam Jafar al-Sadiq was born in an environment that elevated or prioritized scholarly pursuits, because his father was an individual who penetrated deeply into knowledge. He was born into this environment. And his mother, Farwa, an important individual. At the age of 31, he succeeds his father. So this is the year 114 after Hijrah. And I think the important points from this timeline to remember is that Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, up until the point of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, Imam al-Baqir and Imam Zain al-Abidin, they would teach a very small core group of followers, but it was fairly secret or covert environment. Because remember, they were under the surveillance by the Umayyads, so they couldn't do public discourses with a broad group of people. So Imam Zain al-Abidin, for example, the traditions tell us that he would teach his students at night on his bistan, on his farm, and so he would teach them every night in the darkness of night, and then during the daytime there was no evidence of the teaching. So it was a very covert, undercover type of operation. But I mention that because, in this interregnum period where you have this transition between the Umayyads and the Abbasids, this is the opportunity that Imam Jafar al-Sadiq took and seized that opportunity very opportunistically to really establish his academy. So what does his academy look like? Many times people will say that Imam Jafar al-Sadiq established the first university in the world. But I think that's not a correct summary, because it wasn't really a university in the sense of the university that we have today. And I have a table later on that'll get into it. But I think the important point here is that Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, between Medina and Kufa, established this academy, an academy meaning an informal network of learning that included both a core group of followers like Hisham ibn Hakam and Fudayl and other close companions of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq. But this informal network of learning circle also included other individuals such as Abu Hanifa, Malik ibn Anas, and other such individuals. And so really the period that we're talking about is really from the year 740 to the year 754, because the Umayyad dynasty was collapsing during this period. The Abbasids were coming into power, and they had other priorities other than surveilling the Ahlul Bayt. So Imam Jafar al-Sadiq took this opportunity, this 14-year opportunity, to develop an informal public network of teaching that spanned between Medina and Kufa. So you could see that his academy was really transnational, wasn't just located in a specific area. Oftentimes when we talk about the academy of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, we only focus on the Medinan period, but I think there's a rich history to be explored during his time in Kufa. He didn't live in Kufa, but he would often go to Kufa, and he would often have a informal network there. So I think it's an important period. So when we talk about the academy of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, what differentiated it, and how did it look like compared to the modern American university? And here I put together a table that looks at various dimensions that are the focus of the academy of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq and the modern American university. And I'm going to take a deep dive on these three dimensions, but let's take a high-level overview of these general dimensions. The first important one is the purpose of knowledge in these different institutions. So in the American university, the primary historical objective of the university education is career preparation, and knowledge is viewed as a commodity, meaning it's something that you acquire, and it's something that's reflected in a paper certificate at the end, or in a degree that reflects that you have some modicum or some degree of knowledge. That's what I mean by a commodity. It's something that's easily fungible. It's not differentiated. You can get that commodity anywhere. So a commodity, for example, includes things like orange juice, oil, wheat. These are commodities, meaning you can grow them anywhere, you can trade them, and it's a fungible asset. It's something that can be traded very easily. So the American university has historically been developed with the objective of career preparation and knowledge commodification. Whereas the purpose of knowledge during the time of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq in this specific academy was really for the pursuit of tazkiyah. Tazkiyah meaning self-purification. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. So knowledge is a means towards personal elevation and towards connection and purification to enable that connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And really, the secondary principle or the secondary objective of the university is service to truth and justice. So use that, and not just simply for your own benefit and elevation, but also to benefit the community. And this is in continuation of the Prophet's beautiful hadith that to everything there's a zakat. لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ zakat. وَزَكَاةُ الْعِلْمِ نَشْرًا. And the zakat, or the way to purify your knowledge, is by spreading it. Meaning knowledge isn't just something that's held and guarded as a secret, but the obligation of taking the knowledge is to share the knowledge broadly and to benefit society. And so that was primary objective of the University of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq. The environment during the time of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, sacred, as I said, informal networks, humble gatherings in the bustan, in the farm, gatherings in the masjid, gathering in public places. Whereas the environment in the modern university, very corporate and consumer-oriented campuses. So we're looking to make things appealing and make the university experience a appealing consumer product. So come to the university so that you can enjoy time at a fraternity or a sorority, or we have a really nice student center, or we have a really good football team. Come and you'll enjoy these things. So it's a very much corporate-oriented consumer product type of environment. In terms of the epistemology, and here epistemology, I mean like the rationale for study, or like really the curriculum for studying. Imam Jafar al-Sadiq tried to unify between aql, wahi, revelation, and illumination. That's why many schools of thought go back to Imam Jafar al-Sadiq. So among the Sufis, for example, at least 12 tariqas trace their silsila back to Imam Jafar al-Sadiq for that very much irfani, esoteric, deep knowledge that he spread among his followers. Likewise, among the rationalists, we would say the proto-Mu'tazilis, the people that believed in mantiq, they can trace their lineage back in some shape or form to Imam Jafar al-Sadiq. The other thing this is a pretty long list, but I'll skip down to the disciplinary boundaries. Imam Jafar al-Sadiq had a very vibrant circle that was all-encompassing of many different disciplines, whereas today the modern university very much hierarchical and hyper-specialized, siloed. So you have different departments because of the nature of the knowledge that's being produced. It's very difficult to cross those boundaries unless you have some sort of an interdisciplinary type of focus or pursuit. The three areas that I really want to focus on, and that'll be the discussion for the bulk of the rest of the talk, are really the role of the university or the academy with regard to community engagement, the teacher's role, and patronage funding. And I think these are three important dimensions that are worth taking a deeper dive on. And in fact, the anecdotes that I'll share will specifically focus on how Imam Jafar al-Sadiq pursued these dimensions with his academy relative to the modern American university. So with regard to the aspect of community engagement, as I said, the objective of the students who left the university is to become people that were servants to the ummah and to the concept of adala and justice. Whereas the concept of the modern American university, the ultimate outcome or the ultimate output is related to grants, rankings, and citations. So any of you who are involved with in the academic pursuit, the saying, publish or perish. The whole point of being an academic is to publish things that will be heavily cited, and that citation count is a reflection of the quality of your work. It's a surrogate for how effective you are in terms of your research and how effective you are in terms of the scholarly output that you put forth. Whereas the metric that Imam Jafar al-Sadiq held high was really service to the ummah and justice. And I'm going to give you some examples of that, how knowledge was a means to enabling unity and not towards enabling disunity. The teacher's role. The role of the teacher during the time of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq was a murabbi. Murabbi meaning someone who nurtures the soul and the intellect, a guide, not just simply someone who teaches you a curriculum and then gives you a test and then assesses your capabilities in terms of responding to that test, but someone who has a vested interest in growing you as an individual, both spiritually and intellectually. Whereas today, if you're an undergraduate, the instructor is basically viewed as a data deliverer and a cog in a machine, meaning the instructor, oftentimes, if you do have a full-time faculty member, they'll be engaged with pursuing a grant. And if they are engaged in teaching, it's oftentimes very superficial. Their objective is to get high ratings. Oftentimes you have this website. How many of you have seen this website? RateMyProfessor.com, right? And you go there and you rate your professor and you say, well, my professor, taught well or didn't teach well. And at the end of the year, they give you a survey about how did your professor teach. And it's the students that determine the professors that, inevitably get tenure versus those that don't get tenure. So you have to really cater to the student, and you're not really, the professor's job isn't to push the student, but it's to really appease the student, to give the student an easy A so that student will give you a good rating, and then that rating will enable you to get tenure and to get good marks. So it's very different from the murabbi. The Murabbi has your best interest in mind, and they want to elevate you. They know sometimes things are challenging, but they're challenging you for a good reason. They're not challenging you for the sake of torturing you. And I think this role has been unfortunately overturned. And then in terms of patronage and funding, during the time of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, and we'll go into this, the academy was supported entirely by Imam Jafar al-Sadiq and by the proto-awqaf, waqf meaning the public institution that funded these types of public things. Whereas in modern times, as I mentioned, it's primarily driven through government grants, corporate sponsors, and tuition. So you have, for example, as I mentioned, $60 billion in government funding that goes to funding universities. And you have many corporate benefactors that donate and that are patronizing universities. So for example, here at MIT, how many of you have seen the Koch Institute? Koch Institute. You know, the Koch Cancer Institute. And the Koch Cancer Institute, the irony there is that it's funded by the Koch brothers. You know what the Koch brothers do? K-O-C-H? They are among the leading producers of industrial toxins. So among the leading producers of the things that cause cancer are funding an institute that studies cancer research. So what do you think, the research that goes on at the Koch Institute, how much of it is looking at the environmental impact of industrial toxins on the development of cancer, and how much you're looking at other things that are related to genetics and other things? Point is, when you get sponsorship from corporate and government institutions, they have a vested interest in seeing certain types of research being pursued and certain types of research not being pursued, which ultimately has an impact on the integrity of the types of research and academic things that happen. Whereas during the time of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, there was no patronage of his particular academy by either the Abbasids or the Umayyads. So let's take a deeper dive into these three dimensions, these anecdotes. I'll share with you some of these anecdotes on patronage, teachers' role, and community engagement. And inshallah, we'll benefit from these lessons from Imam Jafar al-Sadiq. So the first question, how did Imam al-Sadiq fund his scholarly efforts? And I love these two beautiful narrations from al-Kulayni that talk about Imam Jafar al-Sadiq as someone who earned his livelihood, pursuing the halal. Imam Jafar al-Sadiq here, one day, an individual saw Imam Jafar al-Sadiq on a very hot day working in his farm. And he said to Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, why do you exert yourself on a day like this? وَأَنْتَ بِجَهْدِ نَفْسَكَ فِي مِثْلِ هَذَا الْيَوْمِ. So a very hot day, he saw Imam Jafar al-Sadiq out in the field, working, sweating, asking him, why are you working in the fields? You're an imam, you're a scholar. You should be doing something more dignified, like reading books or writing papers. And Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, his response is beautiful. He says, خَرِجْتُ فِي طَلْبِ الرِّزْقِ لِأَسْتَغْنِي عَنْ أَمْثَالِكَ. He says, I came out to earn my daily bread so that I would not have to depend on the likes of you. Imam Jafar al-Sadiq here is telling us that the important part of being a scholar is to have a livelihood that is halal and to pursue it in a way that enables you to be independent of influence from any individual or from any institution or from any type of person that tries to patronize you. It goes further. Man approached Imam Jafar al-Sadiq like a person who would give him advice and said to him, Ya Aba Abdullah, how did it come about that you put your money in different businesses? Ya Aba Abdullah, كيف صرت اتخذت الأموال قطعا متفرقة ولو كانت في موضع واحد كانت أيسر. So he's basically asking Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, Imam Jafar al-Sadiq was an investor and he had his farms and he had some other properties. So he says to him, why do you invest all of your money and wealth in a specific area? Because Imam Jafar al-Sadiq was diversifying his wealth. And he says, if it were all in a single place, it would be more cost effective and beneficial. Imam Jafar al-Sadiq says, I put it in different businesses so that if something goes wrong with this part of the money, the other part of the money will be protected. So this is what we call in modern parlance the portfolio strategy. So Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, like his father Imam al-Baqir, were very smart investors and made good use of their funds to develop these things. And this is a part of their lives that we oftentimes overlook. We look at these individuals as being pious individuals that were spending all day in salat, doing dua, maybe reading Quran. But actually these people, these imams and prophets, were spending their days earning their livelihood. And an important part of being an educator is that, number one, you earn a legal livelihood. But number two, whatever you do, you don't necessarily charge people for the privilege of accessing that information. In Surah Yasin, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَجَاءَ مِنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ رَجُلٌ يَسْعَى قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ اتَّبِعُوا الْمُرْسَلِينَ. Ya qawm, follow the messengers. Which messengers? اتَّبِعُوا مَنْ لَا يَسْأَلُكُمْ أَجْرًا وَهُمْ مُهْتَدُونَ. Follow those who don't ask you for payment. اتَّبِعُوا مَنْ لَا يَسْأَلُكُمْ أَجْرًا وَهُمْ مُهْتَدُونَ. These are the people that are rationally guided. This is an important point because today, many people try to benefit or try to earn a livelihood by giving religious lectures. Like I hear of some instances where people are charging $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 to give a lecture, 1 hour, to share their religious knowledge. And when I look at the hadith literature of the imams, of the prophets, when I look at the Quran, I don't see a single instance of a prophet coming to a people and say, hey, I have some sacred wisdom for you. Give me 2 gold coins and I'll share it with you. Or I have some sacred wisdom for you, but in order to share it, buy my swag. I have maybe a hoodie or I have a t-shirt. Buy this from me and I'll share with you this wisdom. So this is an important point. When we follow our teachers, we should follow individuals that don't ask you for any payment. And these are ultimately the people that are ultimately guided. تَبِعُوا مَنْ لَا يَسْأَلُكُمْ أَجْرًا وَهُمْ مُهْتَدُونَ. These are the people that are guided, not the people that are coming to you saying, yes, I'll give you a lecture, but give me $500 for my time and effort. No, you give them a gift, but that gift should be coming from you, not them coming and demanding a gift from an individual. And I think the life of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, his scholarly efforts being completely self-funded, being funded through his business ventures, is an important lesson for all of us, particularly as students. Don't depend on the income that you get simply from having a university degree, because these things come and go. But develop legitimate skills that you can monetize outside of your degree. Maybe it's a skill like investment. Maybe it's a skill like entrepreneurialism. Maybe it's a skill like farming. Maybe it's a skill like pottery. I mean, whatever skill it is, develop a skill like the imams and the prophets so that you can always develop that autonomy and that independence. Now, the second question, what type of teacher was Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam? I think the best testament to the type of teacher he was comes to us from Malik ibn Anas describing his teacher. And I chose this tradition because it's so beautiful about Malik ibn Anas. Malik ibn Anas, as all of you probably know, is the founder of the Maliki school of thought. He was in Medina, and he was sometimes attended some of the circles of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq informally. And so he had a good connection with him. Now, the degree of influence of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq on Imam Malik ibn Anas is disputed. Some people say that he derived a lot of his knowledge about fiqh from Imam Jafar al-Sadiq. Other people say no, it was only with him for a very limited time. Allahu a'lam. But what we do know is that Imam Malik ibn Anas did spend time with Imam Jafar al-Sadiq alayhi salam. And this is how he describes that interaction. So Malik ibn Anas, the jurist of Medina, said, I used to visit al-Sadiq and he would offer me a cushion and honor me and say, oh Malik, I like you. This is the teacher-student relationship. How many times has your teacher offered you a cushion when you come to a class? Or, smiled or, given you sort of that type of love. And it says, he would offer me a cushion and honor me and say, oh Malik, I like you. That would make me happy. And I would praise God the exalted for that. So this is Malik talking about his teacher, giving him a cushion, smiling and saying, Malik, I like you. And he was always engaged in one of 3 practices, fasting, prayer, or remembrance of God. He was among the greatest of worshipers who feared Allah. He was always full of pleasant speech, and his company was plentiful in benefits. And he would turn sometimes green when he remembered Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he talks about a specific incident during the time of Hajj. So the point here is that the academy of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq with the teacher as murabbi This is what we're talking about in terms of that relationship of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq showing the love for his student in a way that made an impact on that student, Imam Malik ibn Anas, to such a degree that he's narrating that impact many years later. And I think, this reminds me of a beautiful reflection from Khalil Gibran. How many of you have heard of Khalil Gibran, the poet? Yes. He has a Boston connection. And this is the monument of Khalil Gibran outside of Boston Public Library. And Khalil Gibran lived in Boston. And in his book, The Prophet, he has a beautiful summary of the role of a teacher. And when I read this, I view it as the example of how the Ahlul Bayt taught. And I think this, if any of you are teachers, I think this is a great thing to aspire towards in terms of how you approach teaching. Because oftentimes we think of teaching as being something where we force feed information and facts into the heads of individuals, whereas Khalil Gibran and Imam Jafar al-Sadiq suggest another path. So here I'm going to read this. What is the role of a teacher? Then said a teacher, speak to us of teaching. And he said, no man can reveal to you aught but that which already lies half asleep in the dawning of your knowledge. The teacher who walks in the shadow of the temple among his followers gives not of his wisdom, but rather of his faith and his lovingness. It is indeed, if he is indeed wise, he does not bid you to enter the house of his wisdom, but rather leads you to the threshold of your own mind. And then he gives the example of the astronomer may speak to you of his understanding of space, but he cannot give you his understanding. The musician may sing to you of the rhythm which is in all space, but he cannot give you the ear which arrests the rhythm. And he who is versed in the science of numbers can tell you the regions of weight and measures, but he cannot conduct you thither. For the vision of one man lends not its wing to another's. And even as each one of you stands alone in God's knowledge, so must each one of you be alone in his knowledge of God and in his understanding of the earth. The teacher is someone who inspires you and your potential through their love and caring. And that inspiration enables you to reach your maximum potential, which is exactly the way that Imam Jafar al-Sadiq approached teaching as well, in terms of giving a cushion to Malik ibn Anas, smiling and saying, Malik, I like you. He was awakening the potential of Malik ibn Anas in terms of being a follower and being a true student. And finally, I want to share with you a personal anecdote of my meeting with Ayatollah Sistani about 2 years ago. So I was in Iraq and we were in Karbala, staying at the house of my cousin. We got a message on the day of Arafah that Ayatollah Sistani was available to meet. So we quickly got in a car and we drove down to Najaf. And my father and I, we met with Ayatollah Sistani for about 30 minutes. Fortunately, I don't have a photo of that moment, regrettably, but anyway, that's something maybe next time. So we were sitting right here. My father was sitting where the Pope is sitting, and then I was sitting right here. And I took notes from my one-on-one meeting with Ayatollah Sistani. The reason that I bring it up is because I had no agenda in this meeting. It was simply, the office saying he's available to meet. So if you want to meet, please come and meet. So we went there for a meeting, no agenda, just showing up. And I had no clue what Ayatollah Sistani would be talking about. So we went there, and after the fact, I took these notes. And he spent, of the 30 minutes, he spent about 15 minutes talking about teaching. Just went into this free-form monologue about the importance of teaching and his philosophy of teaching. And he talks about traditional Islamic scholarship is based on the relationship between the student and the teacher. This is what he highlighted. And he said the student respects and loves the teacher, and the teacher respects and loves the student. And then he goes on to mention that in contemporary Western scholarship, we see something different. We see a relationship based on fear and lack of love. And the teacher materially fears the student, and the student materially fears the teacher. So here, Ayatollah Sistani was talking about all of the school shootings that were happening in the United States. That was very funny. He said, in the United States, I think the teachers have to have a gun, right? And he pointed like this. Said, no, it's not really always the case, but you're right. There's many school shootings in the United States. But he talked about that in the West, there's this relationship based on fear at the micro level leads to major moral failures on the macro level. And then the reason that I have this picture is he said, the Pope visited me. He sat where your father is sitting. And when I met with the Pope, it became clear that although we share many values and beliefs, there is a major countercurrent in the West based on moral relativism, and everything is permissible, and there's a lack of moral clarity. And then he talks about this lack of moral clarity leads to ethical failures like the killing of George Floyd. And he says, in a world filled with moral and ethical confusion, there's a clear need and thirst for this message of Ahlul Bayt. And he says at the end, remember, it comes down to the teacher-student relationship. It must be based on mutual love and respect. If you teach and communicate in this manner, the path of Ahlul Bayt will always be clear for people. So again, here, Ayatollah Sistani, when he was talking about, I thought he was going to talk about maybe fiqh. I thought he was maybe going to talk about what's the situation in America, but he was giving advice about, look, if you're teaching, the teacher-student relationship should ultimately be based on a relationship of love and trust. And if you approach it in that way, like the Ahlul Bayt approach teaching individuals, then you're going to illuminate the path for individuals, irrespective of the content. The content comes secondary, but the relationship between the student and the teacher is primary. Has to be based on mutual love and mutual understanding. And this is the type of scholarship that Imam Jafar al-Sadiq was teaching. Final two slides on the role of education. What is the role of education? You know, sometimes people use education as a vehicle for dividing the community. So maybe they have some knowledge and then they use that knowledge to differentiate themselves from others. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this in the Quran. He says, وَمَا تَفَرَّقُوا إِلَّا مِن بَعْدِ مَا جَاءَهُمَ الْعِلْمُ بَغْيًا بَيْنَهُم. In Surah 42, Ayah 14, Allah tells us that the divisions in a community oftentimes happen after the revelation appears to the community. وَمَا تَفَرَّقُوا إِلَّا مِن بَعْدِ مَا جَاءَهُمَ الْعِلْمُ بَغْيًا بَيْنَهُم. So oftentimes the revelation of ilm, rather than uniting people, it divides people. And it divides people because people will have different interpretations. Maybe I look at the Quran and I interpret the Quran in a certain way. You look at the Quran and you interpret it in a certain way. And these different interpretations cause divisions within the community. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, don't be like those. وَمَا تَفَرَّقُوا إِلَّا مِن بَعْدِ مَا جَاءَهُمُ الْعِلْمُ بَغْيًا بَيْنَهُم. So the question becomes, Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, living in this intellectually rich milieu, where there were many different schools of thought emerging, many different perspectives. And he was a master in terms of, you know, when people asked him about a question, he said, well, the people of Medina believe this, the people of Kufa believe this. He was always able to talk about these different things. How did he approach the role of knowledge in terms of uniting the community? I think these two anecdotes beautifully talk about how Imam Jafar al-Sadiq approached knowledge as a vehicle towards unification. So here, one time a companion came to Imam Jafar al-Sadiq. He says, we have a dissenting prayer leader who hates all of our associates. So the Imam of the Jama'ah is an individual who theologically was opposed to the students of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq. Now, the question that they were asking Imam Jafar al-Sadiq is, Imam, should we pray behind this prayer leader who hates us, or should we, pray separately? And look at the beautiful response of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq. He said, why should you care about what he says? By Allah, if you are truthful, then you have more right to the masjid than him. لأنت حق بالمسجد منه فكن أول داخل وآخر خارج وأحسن خلقك مع الناس وقل خيرا. And he says, be the first to enter the masjid and the last to leave. Improve your character with the people and speak nicely. Don't use the knowledge as an excuse to divide the community, but rather be the first to go to that masjid, speak nicely with the people, even if they disagree with you, even if that prayer leader is fundamentally against your beliefs. Your role as a Muslim is to go and stand behind that prayer leader. How many of us as followers of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq actually adhere to this principle? I know of many masjids here where people refuse to enter the masjid. Habibi, aren't you both Shia of Ahlul Bayt, Shia of Imam Ali? Yes, but this masjid is led by this leader and this masjid is led by this leader. How many of us have actually read the message of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq where he says, avoid these divisions and stand behind the people even if they disagree with you? So here, the point about the community engagement is using knowledge as a vehicle for unity and not as a vehicle for division. Final part that I'll mention here before I go into a personal reflection is in terms of his appearance. Many times Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, he tried to blend in with the community. So, sometimes when people, they achieve a certain level of knowledge, they try to differentiate themselves by dressing ostentatiously. Ostentatiously meaning trying to show off. And Imam Jafar al-Sadiq tried to dress in a manner that blended in with the people. And sometimes people would criticize him, which is pretty funny. Here you have an imam who's ma'soom, and the people are calling him out on his clothing choices. And so one of these examples that I wanted to call out is from an individual from Basra named Abbad ibn Kathir. And he said to Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, why aren't you dressed like your forefather Imam Ali alayhi salam? So here, Abbad is telling Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, you're dressing really well. Why don't you dress like your forefather Imam Ali, Amir al-Mu'mineen, was dressed? Because ultimately, that's a reflection of how you should be dressing. And Imam Jafar al-Sadiq beautifully responds by saying, كان علي في زمان يستقيم له ما لبس فيه ولو لبست مثل ذلك الباس في زماننا لقال الناس هذا مراء مثل عباد. He said in his time what Ali wore was appropriate for him. If I wear the same clothes in our time, people would say he is ostentatious like Abbad. So Abbad is the guy who was criticizing Imam Jafar al-Sadiq. He flips it on Abbad. And he said, Abbad, if I wore like what Amir al-Mu'mineen was wearing, they would say Imam Jafar al-Sadiq is showing off like Abbad is showing off. So I love the sarcasm and the humor that he uses to respond to Abbad. And I think, many of us know a person like Abbad, someone who's a bit judgy, a bit passive-aggressive. And I think, the response of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq to a person like Abbad is beautiful in that he flips the script and says, look, Abbad, the purpose of being a knowledgeable individual isn't to dress ostentatiously and to differentiate myself from the community, but ultimately to blend in with the community and to be a servant of the community. Salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Muhammad. So I hope with these anecdotes, I've shared with you some of the beautiful personality of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq as a leader of the academy, and how the mode that he pursued in his academy had this beautiful soul and this beautiful spirit that's missing from the modern academy, in that he was a servant to the student. He loved the student, and he used education not merely as a commodity to produce degrees and to produce publications and citations, but he used education as a means towards self-purification and towards elevation of the community. Ultimately, knowledge for him, ilm, was a vehicle towards service for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and service for the community. So within this framework, the question becomes, who are the heirs of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq in modern times? People who aren't serving corporate interests, who aren't serving government interests, who aren't serving institutional interests, but individuals who are serving the interests of Allah and serving the interests of the community. Who are these intellectual heirs of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq today? And I thought deeply about this, and I immediately came to these two individuals who have personally influenced my life pretty significantly. And this individual passed away, Allah yarhamah, last year, Dr. Abdul Sahib Hashim, and his wife, Nancy Hashim. And I thought I would share with you a reflection of why I think he is the intellectual heir of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq. So Dr. Hashim was born in 1927 in Calamain, and he died last year in Maryland in 2024. He migrated to the States in the early 70s, in the early 60s, so roughly in the year 1963 or so. And in the year 1968, and actually in the year 1967, he married his wife, who was Christian at the time, Nancy McDill, who then converted to Islam. And she was a tremendous support for him. This is a really great couple in that they were both pursuing the well-being of each other, but also the well-being of the community. So when Abdul Sahib Hashim had children, he recognized that there was a need to teach his children, but there was also a community that was emerging in the Maryland area and the Virginia area, the DC area, that required good Islamic education. So he was forced to found an Islamic school, the Islamic School of Washington, that served the sons and daughters of diplomats, sons of daughters of professionals, students, all in the Maryland area. He founded this in 1968. And remember, Islam in America at the time was very different from today. This is almost 50 years ago. There were no institutions, no halal venues, no masjids, very few resources available. So he founded this school in 1968, and this school is still in existence today. It's had over 3,500 graduates. The other thing that he recognized is that there was no curriculum. There were no books. So he ended up writing books. And these books were really deep and profound and contained beautiful content. And they've gone through multiple editions. And he has many books, some on Al-Khulafa al-Rashidun, some on Ahlul Bayt. And he published altogether 26 books that made up the curriculum of the school and that have gone through multiple printings. Now, this school served both Sunni and Shia. In fact, the majority of the students were Sunni. About 70% of the students historically have been Sunni, even though Dr. Abdul Sahib Hashim was a Shia individual. And so this school was free of charge to everyone and was completely self-funded. He received no funding from the Saudi government, the Iranian government, any government. This school is still in existence today. And he was a physician by training, but he funded the entire school from his own investments and from his own earnings and from the earnings of the community. Now, beyond the Islamic school that he established, he was also a founder of the Muhtadun Project, because there are many people in jails, in American jails, who want to learn about Islam. And they started learning about the school that Abdul Sahib Hashim had founded, and they started writing him letters. There was no emails at the time. No, fax machines were only starting to emerge. So they would send him letters and fax machines and faxes, asking him for books and information. And he ended up sending them Qur'ans and other materials. And he founded this project in 1985. And in total, he was able to guide 11,659 muhtadun, converts to Islam, within American jails. These are all documented individuals that were led to Islam through his efforts. And finally, he established a website. You can find many of his content, much of his content on his website. And it's an interesting website because, remember, he died when he was almost, so he died last year, 97 years old. He started this website in 1997, so he was about 70 years old. He was a continual lifelong learner who established this website at the twilight of his life. So I think it's a beautiful example of an individual who established an institute, very much like the Institute of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, free of charge, benefited all students. Thousands of individuals have been guided. And if you look him up online, you're not going to find a single picture of him other than this picture of him online. So he's truly a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, an individual who showed love and care for the community, and it's reflected in all of the people whose life he's impacted. And the saying is that Dr. Hashim himself was an ummah unto himself. So the things that he created were almost like an ummah. And I think when we look at the heirs of Imam al-Sadiq, if we use the framework of individuals that serve society, individuals that are uniting between the different communities, Sunni and Shia, individuals that serve the underserved, like the students and like the prisoners, then Abdul Sahib Hashim and Sister Nancy would fall to the top of that. So let's recite Surah Al-Fatiha for their dearly departed souls. He passed away a few months ago, and she passed away about 10 years ago. But the impact that they've had on the community has been profound, not just in the Maryland, D.C. area, but I think globally as well. So let's recite Surah Al-Fatiha for them. So the other individual, and this is the final comment that I'll make here, who I think is an heir of Imam al-Sadiq, is Najah Bazzi. She is a beautiful individual who lives in Dearborn. She's a nurse by training, and she founded this institute called Zaman Foundation, Zaman International, which is whose purpose is to serve the needs of the community in preparation for the appearance of Imam al-Mahdi Ajjalallah Faraja. So she, Sister Najah, originally grew up in a Sunni family. Her family became Shi'i under the tutelage of Sheikh al-Shirri about 50 years ago, one of the great scholars in America. And ever since that time, she trained as a nurse, and then she retired from nursing and founded this institute, Zaman International, whose primary focus is on training women. And this is an important underserved population. So there are many women who come from abusive relationships in this particular part of Michigan. Maybe women who come from refugee families, women who come from more traditional marriages, and they've never developed any life-saving skills. So they're completely dependent on their spouse. And then when they enter into an abusive relationship and they end up divorcing, the spouse doesn't take care of them. And unfortunately, they're neglected and left on their own. So she founded this institute for training of women. And this training takes multiple dimensions. There's training, vocational training, career development, entrepreneurship, and then also basic services like sewing, like baking, like entrepreneurialism. And what she has done through her academy is empowered women through sustainable careers. So here again, when we talk about the legacy of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq as someone who served Allah by serving the community, I think an individual like Najah Bazzi would serve truly as the heir of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq. And if you ever have the chance to go to Michigan, I would urge you to visit the institute that she's built. You know, the institute that she's built is called Beit al-Zahra. She's named it after Fatima al-Zahra. It's a massive institute. You walk through, and by the end of it, it's very difficult not to be crying because you see the impact that she's had directly on the women and this joy and the spirit that emerges from this environment. Many of these women coming from very abusive and oppressive backgrounds. So we conclude, the conclusion here, as we commemorate the death of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, hopefully what you've taken away is that, many times people will say, look, Imam Jafar al-Sadiq developed the first university. And they'll sometimes over-exaggerate what Imam Jafar al-Sadiq did. The other day someone told me Imam Jafar al-Sadiq invented chemistry. I said, no, I don't think he invented chemistry. He said, no, Jabir ibn Hayyan invented the periodic table. I said, no, I think that's Mendeleev. No, I said, no, it was Jafar al-Sadiq, Jabir ibn Hayyan. They invented chemistry in the modern university, and we tried to exaggerate what these individuals did. And I think in that exaggeration, we disrespect the legacy that they actually built, because what they built is more permanent and more spiritual and more elevated than the modern university. See, the modern U.S. university is facing an existential crisis. It doesn't know what its primary objective is. Is the objective to generate revenue, enroll students, or is it to train people that are ethically driven and morally driven, and people that pursue the community, the benefit of the community? And I think what I want you to take away is that what Imam Jafar al-Sadiq created isn't like the university. It's not better than the university. It's something different. It's something special. And that specialness was foundationally built on the teacher-student relationship, which is built on love and built on an understanding of trying to improve the well-being of society. The final thing that I want you to take away is that sometimes The heirs of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq aren't within institutions that we recognize. So notice, I didn't mention people from the houses being the intellectual heirs of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq. I didn't mention people from universities. Not to disrespect those institutions, but those institutions have a very different objective. The objective of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq wasn't to publish or to write books or to citations. It was really the improvement of the community. And I think sometimes the true heirs of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq are people like Dr. Abdul Sahib Hashim, Sister Nancy Hashim, and Sister Najah al-Bazzi. And we'll conclude with this dua of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq that has been narrated through many different traditions. And actually, this is a beautiful dua because I found this dua among the Sunnis, among the Shi'is, and we recite this dua in our daily salat as well. And I think it's a great dua as a great reminder of why we should be pursuing knowledge and ilm. And here the dua of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min ilmin la yanfa' wa qalbin la yakhsha' wa nafsin la tanfa' wa du'a'in la yurfa'. Oh Allah, I seek refuge in you from knowledge that does not benefit, a heart that does not soften, a soul that is never content, and a supplication that is not raised. Meaning, not all knowledge is created equal. Knowledge that benefits is the type of knowledge we should pursue. Most knowledge today that people call knowledge is actually not very beneficial knowledge. It's very trivial knowledge. It's knowledge that actually may harm more than it benefits because it's a knowledge that's distracting. So I think ultimately our inspiration from Imam Jafar al-Sadiq should be that inspiration that knowledge isn't equivalent to degrees, it's not equivalent to credentials, but as Imam Jafar al-Sadiq has said, ليس العلم بكثرة التعليم بل هو النور يقذفه في قلب من يشاء. Knowledge is not excessive learning and memorization of facts and accumulation of certificates and credentials, but knowledge is a type of nur that Allah puts in the hearts of those who He desires. So the ultimate thing that we can take away from the legacy of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq is if we want to be the pursuers of the path of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq is to cultivate that nur that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put within us and to follow that nur wherever it leads us. ليس العلم بكثرة التعليم بل هو النور يقذفه في قلب من يشاء. And we'll conclude with the dua, اللهم إني أعوذ بك من نفس لا تشبع ومن قلب لا يخشع ومن علم لا ينفع ومن صلاة لا ترفع ومن دعاء لا يسمع. And let's conclude also with the recitation of أمن يجيب المضطر 5 times. There are many people suffering today. There's many things happening around the world. We were talking earlier about India and Pakistan. I think, may Allah protect the people in those regions, inshallah, from a wider conflict. We obviously have Gaza. May Allah protect the people of Gaza. May Allah protect the people of Pakistan, of Yemen. And may Allah protect the people in this community as well. We have many people suffering in this community as well, in the Muslim community around the world, suffering mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to alleviate their pain and suffering by reciting أَمَّنْ يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ 5 times. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أَمَّا يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ أَمَّا يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء ويجعلكم خلفاء الأرض أإلها مع الله قليلا ما تذكرون. صلوات. اللهم صل على محمد.